Chapter 1. Embarkation at Southampton. The winter sun shone pale and cold upon the bustling docks of Southampton. A low mist clung to the air, mingling with the pungent scent of coal smoke and the tang of salt water. Amid the clatter of porters and the hissing of steam, the great SS Elysee lay moored, a gleaming white leviathan adorned with gilt trim and fluttering pennants. Its decks promised comfort, refinement, and, if one believed the illustrated brochure, a journey of unparalleled leisure through the warm blue waters of the Mediterranean. I had accompanied Hercule Poirot at his invitation, though in truth my friend rarely required company for his voyages. He stood now upon the gangway, his green leather valise in one hand, his immaculate grey overcoat buttoned to the chin, and his bowler hat set at a precise angle. The famous moustaches were in full command, brushed, waxed, and glistening with the morning light. "Mon ami," he said, turning slightly toward me as we advanced, "observe how even at the moment of embarkation the drama of humanity plays out before us. There, see the young man in the shabby suit. He carries himself as a gentleman, but the scuffed shoes betray him. And the lady with the white fox fur. She smiles at the purser, but her eyes, they are wary." I smiled. "It is only natural for people to feel anxious before a long voyage." "Perhaps," said Poirot softly, "or perhaps it is because some have boarded this ship for reasons that are not entirely innocent. Once aboard, the grandeur of the Elysee struck me immediately. A sweeping staircase of polished mahogany led to the upper salons. The walls were adorned with oil paintings of Mediterranean scenes, and a faint perfume of lavender drifted from somewhere unseen. Stewards in crisp white jackets moved briskly among the passengers, directing them to their cabins. Our own accommodations, though modest compared to the opulent first-class suites, were comfortable. A pair of adjoining staterooms on the promenade deck, each with a porthole overlooking the churning harbour water. I was stowing my bag when Poirot tapped lightly at my door. "Come, Hastings," he said, "we shall take a little promenade about the decks. It is well, in any voyage, to acquaint oneself with one's fellow travellers early. The first impressions, they are like the first page of a book. Later, one may see how the story changes." We made our way to the open deck, where the wind tugged at coats and scarves. Small groups of passengers were already gathering. An elderly clergyman reading a pocket Bible, a vivacious young couple laughing at some private jest, and a tall, lean man with a face like carved stone, who stood alone at the rail, staring intently into the water. It was then that a young woman passed us, a striking figure in a navy travelling suit, her hat tilted just so, a strand of auburn hair escaping to dance in the breeze. Her eyes met Poirot's for a moment, and though she smiled politely, I saw her glance back twice before disappearing into the main salon. "You noticed, Hastings?" Poirot murmured. "She was certainly attractive," I admitted. "That also," he said with a faint smile. "But I refer to the way she held her handbag, with both hands clasped, as though it were a prisoner she guarded, and the tiny mark, like a scratch, upon her cheek. I do not yet know what it means, but—" He lifted his shoulders in a small shrug. "It is an indication." Before I could ask further, the ship's whistle gave a long, mournful blast. Lines were cast off, and the Elysee began her slow, stately glide from the dock. Passengers leaned over the rails, waving to those ashore. Somewhere behind us, a brass band struck up a jaunty tune that was swiftly swallowed by the growing distance. It was in that moment, as the port slipped away and the ship turned toward open water, that I heard it. A snatch of conversation carried on the wind from the far end of the deck. Two men speaking in low but urgent tones. Must be done before we reach Lisbon. She knows too much. I turned quickly, but the crowd was shifting, and I could not at once locate the speakers. Poirot, however, had already moved, his head turning slightly, his eyes darting in that bird-like way of his. After a moment, he nodded to himself and resumed his stroll as if nothing had occurred. We spent the remainder of the afternoon exploring the ship, the card-room with its green baize tables, the richly upholstered smoking lounge, and the glittering dining saloon with its rows of white-clothed tables set with silver and crystal. Everywhere there was the hum of conversation, the clink of glasses, and the faint underlying vibration of the great engines far below. That evening, dressed in our dinner jackets, we joined the other passengers in the saloon for the captain's welcome banquet. Captain Duval, a tall, distinguished man with a clipped French beard, made a brief speech about the voyage ahead, promising fair seas and good company. The meal was excellent lobster bisque, roast pheasant, and a chocolate soufflé that Poirot pronounced parfait. Yet my friend seemed distracted. His gaze roamed from table to table, observing the smallest gestures. A man's hand trembling slightly as he poured wine, a woman's sudden stiffening when addressed by the purser, the fleeting glance exchanged between two passengers seated far apart. When the orchestra struck up a waltz in the adjoining lounge, Poirot leaned toward me. "Hastings, my friend," he said quietly, "you have the expression of one who has enjoyed a pleasant meal and anticipates a pleasant voyage." "Why shouldn't I?" I asked. "The company seems agreeable enough." Poirot's eyes twinkled, though his tone remained grave. "Perhaps, but I have seen already the tiny fraying threads in this tapestry, and when such threads are pulled—" He made a small, sharp gesture with his fingers. "The whole pattern may unravel." I laughed lightly, but inwardly I wondered. Poirot's instincts were rarely wrong, and if he sensed trouble before we had even left the Channel, it boded ill for the peaceful holiday I had envisioned. Later, as I stood alone on the deck beneath a canopy of cold stars, I caught sight of the auburn-haired young woman again. She was speaking in hushed tones to the tall, stone-faced man I had seen earlier. When she noticed me watching, she turned abruptly and vanished into the shadows. The wind carried with it the low thrum of the engines, and somewhere below, the faint clatter of metal on metal, perhaps from the galley, perhaps from somewhere else entirely. In that moment, a curious unease settled over me, as though the Elysee carried not only passengers and cargo, but secrets waiting to surface. And though I could not have known it then, before this voyage was over, one of those secrets would end in murder. Hey, detective, quick question. Where in the world are you solving mysteries from? Drop your city in the comments. And if you want more twisted tales, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's case, it gets even creepier. Stay sharp. Chapter 2. An ominous introduction. The next morning dawned with a brittle brightness, the sky a pale enamel bowl, and the sea ironed smooth. The Elysee moved with a queenly assurance, her brasswork flashing in the sun, and her funnels trailing polite ribbons of smoke. After breakfast, Poirot and I made a leisurely tour of the promenade deck, where the passengers, like actors before the start of a matinee, strolled, nodded, and measured one another with discreet curiosity. "Names, Hastings," said Poirot. "It is well to put labels upon the jars before we discover what they contain." He had already been busy. Within the hour I was introduced, with the formality of a drawing-room, to several figures who would soon fill our thoughts. There was Lady Agatha Penrith, handsome and erect, with the white fox fur I had noticed the day before. Her manner was crisp as new banknotes. She appraised Poirot's moustaches with frank interest. "You are the detective," she observed, as though identifying a new species of orchid. "An odd comfort at sea, like a surgeon at a country house party. One hopes one shan't need him, and is relieved one does." Poirot bowed. "Madame is too amiable." Trailing behind Lady Agatha was her secretary, Miss Inez Vale, a neat young woman whose spectacles could not disguise a naturally anxious expression. She carried a leather folio as though it contained state secrets. Next came the clergyman, Reverend Josiah Colfax, with a kind eye and a sun-faded collar. His handshake was dry and firm. "A voyage is always a pilgrimage, Mr. Poirot," he said gently. "Let us pray there are no trials at the end of it." His glance drifted toward the ship's rail, where a tall, lean man stared down at the froth, slashing past the hull. "That is Mr. Victor Mallory," the Reverend added softly. "A man of few words." "Few?" I doubted he had surrendered 10 since we sailed. The face might have been cut from granite. Only the pale flicker of his eyes betrayed animation. We had not gone far when the auburn-haired young woman of the previous night approached, her navy suit replaced by a light day dress. Up close, she was all quickness and control, as if each motion were carefully rationed. "Miss Evelyn Hart," she said, offering a gloved hand. "I have long wanted to see the Mediterranean. They tell me the light is incomparable." "Light, mademoiselle," said Poirot, "is a wonderful revealer and a most treacherous flatterer." She smiled, but her gaze darted, one swift bird-like flutter, toward Mr. Mallory at the rail. Poirot, who never missed such flights, inclined his head as though filing a paper. By the smoking lounge, we encountered Mr. Julian Harcourt, a financier with an expensive stoop and the anxious fingers of a gambler. His cufflinks were discreet and perfect. His smile was not. "Always admired your methods, Monsieur Poirot," he declared heartily. "All in the mind, eh? No rough stuff. Capital." His hand, lifting a cigar case, trembled almost imperceptibly. "Travelling alone," he added too quickly. "Always have. Find it restful." From the music-room spilled a gust of laughter, and the shining soprano of Madame Sophia Bellini, a celebrated opera singer touring incognito in a hat that proclaimed her to the world. She waved a hand sparkling with rings. "Caro Signor Poirot, I have seen your face in a newspaper. It is very small. In reality, it is, how do I say, more capo di tutti I baffi." "Your kindness enlarges it, madame," said Poirot, with the ghost of a bow. Our gallery of players was completed by the purser, Mr. Leclerc, quick-eyed, immaculate, and over-precise, and Captain Duval, who favoured Poirot with a brief nod that balanced courtesy with the natural reserve of command. "Your reputation precedes you, Monsieur Poirot," said the captain. "I trust our voyage will be uneventful. My ship, she is happiest with music and champagne, not policemen." "Eh bien," Poirot murmured when we moved on. "Let us hope she drinks only of the bubbles, not of the tears." Through these introductions ran a fine filament of unease. I felt it in the too smooth pleasantries, the way several eyes slid away from Miss Hart, and the invisible current tethering her to Mallory. Poirot felt it too. I could tell by the way his head tipped a fraction, like a hawk measuring the air. We took deck chairs. A steward brought coffee. Poirot folded his hands. "Consider, Hastings. Already there are the little discrepancies. Lady Agatha speaks of a detective as a comfort, yet she keeps beside her a secretary who holds a folio like a shield. Mr. Harcourt, a man of finance, trembles at his own leisure. Miss Hart's cheek bears the mark that is no longer a fresh scratch, but a fading one, signifying it was made before embarkation. And Mr. Mallory, whose face says solitary, is twice observed in conversation with a lady who looks anywhere but at him. Perhaps they are engaged, I suggested feebly. Engagements are rarely conducted with such care to appear disengaged, said Poirot, and the words we overheard, before Lisbon, they begin to take the shape of a clock. At luncheon, a minor embarrassment occurred. The steward announced with many apologies that a parcel addressed to Miss Hart had been misdelivered to Mr. Harcourt's cabin. A flicker of consternation crossed both faces. The briefest shadow, then gone. The parcel was produced, unremarkable brown paper tied with blue string. Miss Hart accepted it with what I can only call studied calm. Poirot ate very little. He watched very much. In the afternoon I went below to fetch a book, and returning along the starboard corridor of B-deck, nearly collided with Miss Hart. She stood outside a cabin door, numbered 42, glancing quickly up and down the passage. In her hand was the same parcel. She started when she saw me. "Forgive me," I said. "These corridors, one would think them designed to breed collisions." "Quite," she answered primly, "if you will excuse me." She rapped twice upon 42. The door opened a fraction. A pale hand, male I think, emerged, took the parcel, and the door shut with the soft, final little click of a well-oiled lock. I hurried up to the promenade to report to Poirot, but he was already approaching at his peculiar mincing gait, eyes gleaming. "You have seen something, Hastings?" I told him. He listened, nodding. "On. We add this to our list. A parcel that first goes astray, and then goes to a door that opens no more than 2 inches. The blue string, did you note it?" "Yes, why?" "Because, my friend, the knot was a sailor's reef knot, not the clumsy bow of a shop assistant. It suggests the parcel was retied aboard. Also, there is the perfume. Perfume? Very faint. Verbena. It clung not to Miss Hart, but to the paper itself. I am acquainted with Madame Bellini's preference." He sighed. "These little threads, they cross, they knot." Before dinner, an incident occurred that, while trivial in itself, sharpened the atmosphere like a knife on stone. A lifeboat cover, lashed fast all morning, came loose suddenly and flapped like a wounded wing. A coil of rope tumbled from the davits and would have struck Miss Hart, had not Mr. Mallory stepped forward, seized her shoulder, and drew her back with rough efficiency. For a second they stood too close. Her eyes flashed with something, not gratitude. "Clumsy maintenance," grunted Mallory to the approaching boatswain. But Poirot's gaze was not for the gear. It lingered where Mallory's hand had gripped Miss Hart's sleeve. When he released her, a small crease remained. 2 parallel impressions, perfectly level. "An old soldier," Poirot murmured when they had gone. "He lifts, he steadies, he sets down, without thought. The muscles remember what the mind may wish to forget." We dined amidst tension wracked in music. The orchestra played a Strauss waltz. Couples turned. Glasses glittered. Lady Agatha spoke incisively of Rome. The Reverend discoursed on patience. Mr. Harcourt lost his appetite. Madame Bellini laughed too loudly. The purser took notes in a neat little book. And Miss Hart, outwardly composed, touched her handbag again and again, as though it might attempt an escape. When the sweets had been cleared and coffee served in the salon, a steward approached Miss Hart and murmured something. She rose, colour draining, and followed him out. Poirot stood. "Shall we, Hastings?" We found them in the purser's office. Miss Hart, rigid, Mr. Leclerc, apologetic, and on the desk a single sheet of notepaper on which 4 words had been neatly printed in block capitals. "Return it before Lisbon." The purser looked from the paper to Poirot. "A vulgar hoax, perhaps," he said carefully. "It was slipped under Miss Hart's cabin door." Poirot examined the note without touching it. "The lettering is precise, the edges of the capitals clean. The writer used a hard pencil, 2H, I think, and leaned heavily on the crossbars. A person of control, yet impatient. Miss Hart's mouth was a straight line. I have no idea what this means." Poirot's eyes were on her handbag. "Nevertheless, mademoiselle," he said quietly, "I think it is to you that the ship has just presented its first bill, and somewhere deep within the Elysee, I fancied I heard the slow, cold turning of a key." Chapter 3. A whisper in the night on the Elysee had settled with a velvet hush. The stars, brilliant pinpricks above the ink-black sea, cast a faint shimmer upon the water. Within the ship's grand corridors and salons, lamps flickered behind frosted glass, and the gentle creak of timber mingled with the steady thrum of the engines deep below. Poirot and I had retired early to our adjoining cabins, the weight of the day's discoveries heavy upon us. Yet sleep eluded me. The mind, once set upon a puzzle, refuses rest as a stubborn child defies a parent's admonition. Shortly past midnight, drawn by an unnameable impulse, I donned my robe and slippers and stepped quietly into the corridor. The deck was deserted, save for a few sentinels of night, the watchman and a lone steward making rounds. The air was cooler here, scented faintly with salt and the wood polish of the ship's interior. I made my way toward the promenade deck, where the moonlight carved silver paths across the waves. The night was alive with the low sigh of the sea and the occasional cry of a distant seabird. As I passed the smoking lounge, a faint murmur caught my ear. A whisper carried on the draught that escaped the slightly ajar door. Curiosity overcame caution. I stepped closer, peering through the crack. 2 men stood near the bay windows, their figures shadowed and indistinct. Their voices were hushed but urgent. "Before we reach Lisbon," one said, his tone clipped and resolute, "she cannot be allowed to speak." The other, younger and nervous, nodded quickly. "But the others, if she disappears, questions will arise." The first replied coldly, "We will manage. The captain must not know. The game is delicate, and the prize beyond price." A faint clatter disturbed the younger man. He reached into his coat pocket, producing a small folded note, which he handed to his companion. "This is the last warning." I held my breath, heart pounding. Then a sudden movement startled me, and I stepped back too briskly. The door creaked slightly. Both men spun toward the opening. I ducked behind a pillar just as a heavy hand reached out, closing the door with a decisive click. My mind raced. Who were these men? And who was the woman they referred to? The one who could not be allowed to speak? My thoughts returned immediately to Miss Evelyn Hart. Could she be the she in question? Poirot would be the first to analyze this fragment of overheard treachery. But alone, I felt the chill of danger that now seemed to hover over the ship. I returned to my cabin and found Poirot already awake, sitting at his writing desk, his moustaches twitching as he scribbled notes. "Hastings," he said without looking up, "the sea is a great equalizer. It washes away secrets, or buries them deeper. We have stumbled upon a secret tonight. The question is, what is its nature?" I recounted what I had heard, carefully preserving the words and the tone. Poirot's eyes gleamed with the light of a mind working at full throttle. "Before Lisbon," he mused aloud, "is a fixed point. We have a deadline and a threat." He rose and began to pace the room, fingers steepled. we must consider those who might benefit from the silence of a certain lady. Miss Hart, I ventured. Precisely. Yet one must be cautious. Appearances, as we know, can deceive. We agreed to observe closely. The following day the ship's routine was unaffected outwardly, but beneath the polished surface currents churned. During the morning promenade, Poirot intercepted Lady Agatha once more. Her icy demeanour had softened slightly. "I hear troubling whispers," she confided, lowering her voice. "Not everyone aboard is as innocent as they appear. I fear there is a darker purpose to this voyage." Poirot nodded gravely. "You have the insight of experience, madame. One must always heed the warning of subtle unease." Later, I found Mr. Harcourt nervously fingering a coin in the smoking lounge. His gaze flicked repeatedly to the stairwell, as if expecting someone. "Troubles of the mind, Mr. Harcourt?" I asked. He jumped slightly, then smiled thinly. "Only the cares of business. One never truly leaves them behind." A knock at the door interrupted us. Madame Bellini entered, radiant despite the morning's gloom. "Ah, Hastings, I trust you are enjoying the voyage." "More so than expected, madame," I replied, "though there are whispers." She waved a hand dramatically. "Whispers are the music of the sea. They stir the soul, but do not break the heart." That evening, as twilight bled into night, the passengers gathered in the lounge for a recital by Madame Bellini herself. Her voice soared, rich, haunting, filling every corner with longing and passion. The effect was almost hypnotic. As the final notes faded, Poirot leaned toward me. "Note, Hastings, how the shadows lengthen, how the light plays upon faces. Some mask fear, others ambition." Our eyes met over the swirl of cigarette smoke. Between the notes of the opera and the rolling sea, the game was afoot, and the stakes, as I now feared, were life and death. Chapter 4. The Locked Cabin Mystery. The morning air was crisp as the Elysee sliced steadily through calm seas, the sun casting a soft glow on the white decks. The passengers moved about with the usual mix of casual conversation and careful observation, yet a subtle tension clung beneath the surface, like a shadow refusing to be dismissed. Our peaceful voyage was shattered just after breakfast. The announcement came swiftly, carried through the ship by the steward's measured voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please. A serious incident has occurred. We regret to inform you that Mr. Julian Harcourt has been found dead in his cabin. The authorities have been notified." A murmur rippled through the gathering crowd. Poirot's expression remained composed, but the sharpness in his eyes betrayed a swift calculation underway. I followed him as he made his way to the scene of the tragedy. Cabin 42, the same door I had seen Miss Evelyn Hart approach with the mysterious parcel just 2 days prior. The corridor was cordoned off, and the ship's purser, Mr. Leclerc, awaited us with a grave demeanour. "An unfortunate event, Monsieur Poirot," said Leclerc quietly. "The cabin was locked from the inside. No sign of forced entry." "An intriguing detail," Poirot mused. "And what of the body?" Leclerc gestured toward the open door. Inside, the cabin was small but tidy. A neatly made bed, a writing desk with papers scattered as though dropped in haste, and a single chair overturned. On the floor lay Mr. Harcourt's body, pale and still. There was no visible wound, no blood. A faint scent of almonds lingered in the air, a subtle but chilling hint. "Cyanide," whispered Poirot, "a poison swift and silent." The cabin door bore a heavy lock, which had been engaged from the inside. No other access points existed save the small porthole, securely latched. The windows were double-paned and locked. Poirot crouched beside the body, examining the hands and face. Note the absence of struggle, Hastings. This was a deliberate act, yet one carried out with a certain elegance. Elegance? I echoed, uneasy. Ah, but even murder, mon ami, can be an art. Questions flooded my mind. Who would wish harm upon Mr. Harcourt, and why? Outside the cabin, whispers swirled like smoke. Lady Agatha appeared pallid, her usual composure shaken. "I never thought such a thing possible aboard this ship," she murmured. "This voyage is cursed." Miss Hart stood apart, her gaze distant. Poirot approached her gently. "Mademoiselle, are you acquainted with Mr. Harcourt?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Only in passing, but—" her voice faltered. "He was involved in matters I cannot discuss." Poirot inclined his head, filing the admission away. Meanwhile, Captain Duval had convened a meeting in the ship's lounge. Passengers were instructed to remain in their cabins or public spaces, while investigations proceeded discreetly. The atmosphere grew thick with suspicion. Every glance carried the weight of accusation, every whispered word a potential clue. Poirot gathered me in a quiet corner. "This is no ordinary murder, Hastings. The locked cabin suggests a puzzle, a challenge, and we must find the key." I looked about, searching for answers in the faces of our fellow travelers. Could the answer lie in the mysterious parcel, or in the cryptic note warning, "Miss Hart"? That evening I observed Miss Hart closely. She moved with purpose, yet seemed burdened by invisible chains. Her handbag was clutched tightly, as if it contained secrets worth killing for. Later, as the ship sailed beneath a silver moon, Poirot called me to his cabin. His eyes were bright with determination. "Hastings, this is but the first act. We must unravel the threads before the tapestry is torn asunder. I will interview the passengers individually. Secrets will not remain buried forever." I nodded, feeling the chill of foreboding settle upon me. The Elysee was no longer just a vessel for pleasure. It was a floating chamber of secrets, and one among us was a murderer. As I lay awake that night, the gentle rocking of the ship was drowned beneath the storm raging in my mind. Who could we trust? And who among us wore the mask of innocence most convincingly? Tomorrow, the hunt would begin in earnest. Chapter 5. Storm over the Aegean. The morning broke grey and restless, the sky a low ceiling of leaden clouds, the sea swelling with a restless energy. The Elysee pitched and rolled as if protesting the uneasy mood that had settled over her decks. The gentle Mediterranean voyage we had anticipated was now marred by a tempest brewing both outside and within. Breakfast was a subdued affair. Voices were hushed. Laughter was scarce. Passengers moved with a new wariness, their eyes flickering to one another as though seeking reassurance or accusation. Lady Agatha, ever the pillar of composure, wore a strained expression, and Miss Evelyn, heart sat rigid, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her teacup. Poirot and I met on the promenade deck, buffeted by the brisk wind. He lit a cigarette with deliberate calm, the smoke twisting upward in spirals that defied the gusts. "Mon ami," he said, "the storm is no mere meteorological event. It mirrors the tempest of human passions that now roil aboard this vessel. The killing of Mr. Harcourt was a salvo, but there are others who stir in the shadows." I glanced toward the horizon, where the sky met the churning sea. Dark clouds gathered like a gathering army. "Do you think another attack is imminent?" I asked. "Indeed, and I fear the game is only beginning." Later that morning, Poirot summoned the passengers to the grand salon, under the pretext of a meeting to assure order and safety. The air was thick with tension as the guests assembled, each concealing their unease beneath polite smiles. Captain Duval addressed the gathering. We face rough seas ahead. I advise all to take care and remain on board. The authorities in Lisbon have been informed of the tragedy, and we shall cooperate fully upon arrival. Eyes shifted uneasily. It was clear the news of the murder had cast a long shadow. Poirot rose then, his presence commanding attention. Mesdames et messieurs, I must ask your patience and cooperation. A tragedy has occurred, but we will find the truth together. There are questions to be answered, and I shall be speaking with each of you in due course. A murmur of assent spread. As the meeting dispersed, I noted the subtle interactions. Lady Agatha exchanging a furtive glance with Miss Vale. Mr. Mallory standing apart, face unreadable, and Miss Hart, whose gaze briefly met Poirot's with a flicker of something unreadable, fear, perhaps, or defiance. That afternoon, the weather worsened. The ship was rocked by fierce winds, and passengers were advised to stay indoors. I took shelter in the smoking lounge, where I found Mr. Mallory alone, staring into the flickering fireplace. "Mr. Mallory," I ventured, "how are you faring with the storm?" He turned slowly, his eyes dark pools of thought. "The sea tests all, Mr. Hastings, some more than others." I recalled the earlier incident when he had caught Miss Hart from the falling lifeboat cover. "You seem protective of Miss Hart." He smiled thinly. "Perhaps, or perhaps I am merely cautious." Before I could question him further, a sharp cry rang out from the upper deck. We rushed outside, where a small crowd had gathered near the railing. There lay a young steward, unconscious, sprawled upon the planks, his face pale and drawn. Poirot arrived swiftly, his eyes scanning the scene. "What happened?" he demanded. "A sudden fall, sir," answered the ship's doctor, examining the steward's pulse. "But there is more. Look here." He held up a small vial, broken and leaking a clear liquid. Poirot picked it up carefully. "Poison, no doubt." Our murderer grows bold. The steward's injury was grave, but not fatal. It was a warning, a message to all aboard. That evening, as the storm raged, we gathered once more in the lounge. Madame Bellini's voice, usually a balm, was strained. Miss Hart sat quietly, her face pale. Poirot took my arm. "Hastings, the storm is both a shield and a sword. It keeps us enclosed, yet sharpens the danger. We must be vigilant." He paused, then added, "The key lies not only in who benefits, but in who fears." As the ship creaked and groaned beneath the weight of waves, I felt the walls closing in. Somewhere within this floating world of secrets, a killer lurked, watching, waiting, and I feared the worst was yet to come. Chapter 6. A Diamond, a Debt, and a Disguise. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind a restless sea still churning under a pale, uneasy sun. The Elysee creaked and groaned like a wounded beast, but she pressed on toward Lisbon, carrying her cargo of secrets and suspicion. Breakfast was a subdued affair, conversations hushed and guarded. Poirot and I sat near a window, observing the other passengers as they ate, faces tense, eyes darting. Our quiet was interrupted by a soft murmur near the door. Lady Agatha entered, her fur collar still damp from the morning mist. With her was Miss Inez Vale, whose anxious eyes flicked constantly about the room. "Gentlemen," Lady Agatha said, her voice low, "I must share a matter of some delicacy." She glanced at Poirot, then at me. "I have reason to believe that one among us carries a secret far more valuable and dangerous than mere words." Poirot inclined his head. "Pray, do tell," Lady Agatha continued cautiously. "Last evening I noticed a small velvet pouch tucked inside Miss Hart's handbag. It was partially open, revealing the glitter of something unmistakably precious. Miss Hart, seated nearby, flushed, but said nothing. "Indeed," Poirot said thoughtfully. "A diamond, perhaps." Such jewels often carry stories of debt, betrayal, or worse. Miss Hart finally spoke, her voice steady but guarded. "That pouch is a family heirloom, entrusted to me for safekeeping. It is not for display." Yet its presence, Poirot mused, cannot be ignored, especially when combined with the parcel, the threatening note, and the recent events. Before more could be said, a commotion at the other end of the dining room drew attention. A man in a dark cloak had appeared, his face partly obscured beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The newcomer moved with deliberate purpose, eyes scanning the room. He approached Captain Duval and whispered something urgently. The captain's brow furrowed deeply. Poirot, ever observant, watched closely. "Who is this man?" I asked quietly. "An unplanned arrival," Poirot replied. "A man with a secret, and perhaps a role in our unfolding drama." Later, in the privacy of Poirot's cabin, we pieced together fragments of conversation overheard throughout the day. The stranger was identified as Armand Lefebvre, a private investigator hired by an unnamed client to recover a stolen jewel. The very diamond Miss Hart guarded. "The jewel is not merely valuable," Poirot explained. "It is a symbol, a debt unpaid, and a potential motive for murder." But the plot thickened. Armand Lefebvre was no mere detective. He carried his own secrets. Rumors whispered of debts owed, alliances forged in shadows, and disguises worn like second skins. That evening, Poirot arranged a discreet meeting. The key players gathered in the smoking lounge. Lady Agatha, Miss Hart, Mr. Mallory, and the enigmatic Lefebvre. Words were exchanged cautiously, accusations veiled in polite language. Miss Hart denied any wrongdoing, but her eyes betrayed anxiety. Lefebvre's gaze was sharp. The diamond must be returned before Lisbon, or worse shall follow. Poirot's voice cut through the tension. "And who, monsieur, stands to gain from its disappearance, or its recovery?" The question hung in the air. As the night deepened, I noticed Mr. Mallory slip away from the group and make his way to the upper deck. Curiosity compelled me to follow. Under the stars, Mallory met with Lefebvre in shadowed secrecy. Their conversation was tense and hurried. I caught fragments. "You promised protection." "The captain must not find out." "No mistakes this time." The diamond, the debt, the disguises, they were threads in a web growing ever more tangled. Returning to my cabin, I found Poirot awaiting me, his eyes alight with the thrill of the chase. "Hastings," he said softly, "the game intensifies. The jewel is the key, but the lock is hidden well. We must watch, listen, and wait." And somewhere deep within the Élysée, the true puppeteer began to move. Chapter 7. The Captain's Dilemma. The morning mist still clung to the decks as the Élysée cut through the sluggish waves en route to Lisbon. The passengers moved about with a measured restraint, the previous day's tension settling into a brittle quiet. Yet, beneath the surface, currents churned and threatened to upend the fragile calm. Captain Duval summoned Poirot and me to his private quarters, a compact room lined with navigational charts and brass instruments. His weathered face wore the deep lines of command and concern. "Monsieur Poirot," he began gravely, "this voyage has taken a most troubling turn. The murder, the attempted poisoning, the arrival of this Lefebvre, these events have unsettled the crew and passengers alike." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Captain, your position is difficult. As master of the ship, you must maintain order, yet the presence of a murderer beneath your command complicates matters." Duval sighed heavily. "Indeed, There is talk among the officers of grounding the ship at the nearest port, handing over the investigation to the authorities. But we are but hours from Lisbon, and delays would cause significant distress and loss. "Have you considered restricting passengers' movements?" Poirot asked. "Strict confinement is impossible aboard a vessel of this size. Fear breeds unrest. We must balance security with civility." I observed the captain's clenched jaw. "Is there anyone aboard you suspect?" I asked. He shook his head. "No one, and yet everyone." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "That is precisely why we must be vigilant. The perpetrator is clever and bold." The captain's voice dropped. "There is another matter. Since Lefebvre's arrival, strange incidents have increased. A fire in the galley that was quickly extinguished, the disappearance of a set of keys from the purser's office, and this morning the ship's doctor was found locked in the laundry room for an hour, unable to explain how he got there." Poirot tapped his fingers together. "Sabotage, misdirection, and distraction, all classic tactics." "Exactly," Duval said. "I fear the murderer aims not only to conceal their crime, but to sow chaos." Leaving the captain's quarters, Poirot and I resolved to increase our own surveillance. Poirot's mind was a whirlwind of possibilities. We observed the passengers with renewed scrutiny. Lady Agatha, once composed, now spoke quietly with Miss Vale, casting furtive glances toward the crew. Miss Hart moved with a tense grace, avoiding eye contact. Lefebvre appeared to shadow Mallory, whose stoic facade betrayed little. That afternoon, during the captain's inspection, a discovery was made. The purser's missing keys were found in the pocket of a steward who had recently been reprimanded for negligence. Confronted, the steward broke down, confessing to taking the keys, but denying involvement in any larger scheme. Poirot questioned him privately. The man spoke nervously of strange orders and whispered threats from an unidentified passenger. "Who gave these orders?" Poirot pressed. The steward looked around anxiously. "I do not know his name. He always wore a dark cloak and hat." The description matched Lefebvre. Poirot's lips twitched. "Monsieur Lefebvre, it seems, is more involved than he admits." That evening, as we dined in the subdued atmosphere of the dining salon, a sudden blackout plunged the ship into darkness. Panic surged briefly, but Captain Duval's calm voice soon restored order. In the flickering candlelight, Poirot took my arm. "Hastings, the shadows lengthen and the danger grows. Our murderer is playing a game of power, manipulating events, testing boundaries." He paused, eyes gleaming. "And soon the mask will slip." As the Elysee sailed steadily toward Lisbon, the passengers and crew remained prisoners to the unseen tempest brewing within their midst. The stage was set for the final acts. Chapter 8. An Invitation to Murder. The dawn was a muted grey, the horizon blurred by mist as the Elysee continued her steady course toward Lisbon. The atmosphere aboard was taut, like a bowstring drawn to its limit, and every whispered conversation seemed charged with concealed meaning. The shadow of death had firmly taken root among us. After a sparse breakfast, Poirot received a note slipped discreetly under his cabin door. The handwriting was elegant, yet unfamiliar, and the message brief: "Meet me in the card room at noon. Alone, there are truths you must know." Curiosity and caution warred within Poirot as he showed me the note. An invitation, Hastings, but from whom, and to what end? At the stroke of noon, we entered the card room, a room of dark wood and green baize tables, dimly lit by stained glass lamps. The air was thick with the faint scent of tobacco and old secrets. A figure sat waiting, a slender woman dressed in mourning black, her face veiled. She rose as we approached, voice a whisper. "Mr. Poirot," she said, "I'm Mrs. Elaine Ratcliffe. My husband was a passenger on this voyage before he disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Poirot gestured for her to sit. Madame, we have suffered loss already. Pray, tell us all that you know. She hesitated, then removed her veil. Her eyes were haunted, and her hands trembled. My husband was investigating a criminal enterprise involving stolen jewels, she explained. He discovered that one of the passengers aboard this ship is connected to the theft of a priceless diamond. Poirot's gaze sharpened. You speak of the diamond entrusted to Miss Hart. She nodded. Yes, but it is more than a jewel. It represents a debt unpaid, a secret that someone would kill to keep hidden. Do you suspect anyone in particular? I asked. Elaine's glance flickered to the doorway. I dare not say, but I fear for my life, if you would protect me. Poirot's voice was firm yet gentle. Madame, I assure you, no harm will come to you while I'm aboard, but we must be swift. She handed Poirot a folded piece of paper. This was my husband's last message, a list of names connected to the crime. I believe it holds the key. Unfolding the paper, Poirot read aloud, Harcourt, Mallory, Lefebvre, Vale, Bellini. A silence fell. The names matched many among our circle. After Mrs. Radcliffe left, Poirot and I discussed the implications. The diamond's theft, the debts, the disguises, all were threads in a complex web. Each of these individuals, Poirot mused, has a motive, a secret, or a debt, and the murderer uses fear as a weapon. Later that day, Miss Hart approached Poirot quietly. Monsieur, she said, I do not trust Lefebvre. He is not what he seems. Indeed, Poirot replied, he wears many masks. Suddenly, a scream shattered the afternoon calm. Passengers rushed toward the upper decks, where the body of Mr. Mallory lay sprawled near the rail, his face pale and eyes wide in a final, frozen shock. Poirot knelt beside him, noting the absence of any wound or blood. His hand moved to the neck, feeling for a pulse that was not there. Poison, Poirot declared, a swift and silent end. The ship shuddered as the sea's restless breath filled the sails, and I felt the weight of inevitability settle upon us. 2 murders aboard a ship of elegance and mystery, and the true killer still at large. Chapter 9. The Midnight Pursuit. The ship's corridors were cloaked in shadow as midnight descended, the flickering gas lamps casting elongated silhouettes upon polished wood. An eerie stillness had settled after the second death, a silence weighted with dread and suspicion. The passengers were confined to their cabins or hushed company rooms, their faces pale and drawn. Poirot and I patrolled the dimly lit promenade deck, eyes sharp and senses alert. The sea's restless murmur mingled with the distant creak of rigging, the only witnesses to the hunt unfolding under the cold stars. Suddenly, a soft rustle betrayed movement near the lower decks. Poirot's finger pressed to his lips, and we edged closer. Through a narrow window, we glimpsed a figure darting swiftly through the labyrinthine passageways. Someone flees, Poirot whispered, and I intend to know why. We gave chase, navigating the maze of corridors, stairwells, and storage rooms. The ship's silence was shattered by our hurried footsteps, echoing with urgency. The figure was fast, almost too fast, but Poirot's keen mind anticipated each turn. At the ship's stern, beneath the moon's pale gaze, the fugitive stumbled, revealing himself in a moment's flicker of moonlight. It was Armand Lefebvre. "Stop!" Poirot commanded, his voice calm but unyielding. Lefebvre turned, eyes wild with fear and defiance. "You do not understand," he hissed. "I seek only to protect the truth." "By running?" Poirot asked, advancing. "Or by hiding in darkness?" Lefebvre's shoulders sagged. I had no choice. The killer's reach extends farther than you know." Poirot studied him closely. "Tell me everything. There is no escape, monsieur." Under the weight of Poirot's unblinking gaze, Lefebvre confessed. He had been tracking the stolen diamond for months, infiltrating a network of criminals. The voyage was a trap, designed to recover the jewel and silence any threats. "Mr. Harcourt discovered my identity," Lefebvre explained. "His death was to keep the secret safe. Mr. Mallory, he was innocent, a pawn caught in the crossfire." Poirot frowned. If Mallory was innocent, then who wields the true power aboard this ship? Before Lefebvre could answer, a sudden shout rang out from the upper deck. We rushed upward to find Captain Duval confronting a man emerging from the shadows. Mr. Julian Vale, Miss Unease Vale's brother, previously unnoticed. The confrontation was heated. Vale's hand trembled as he denied accusations of involvement, but his eyes betrayed a desperate resolve. Poirot stepped between them. "Calm, gentlemen. All truths will be revealed in due course." Later, Lefebvre was confined under guard, his revelations casting new light, but deepening the mystery. The stolen diamond was still missing. The killer's identity remained concealed. That night, as the Élysée rocked gently beneath a starless sky, Poirot sat by the window, lost in thought. "The game is nearing its climax, Hastings," he murmured. "We have uncovered masks, motives, and misdirections. Soon, the final act will unfold." I could only nod, feeling the weight of the coming revelation. For somewhere aboard, the killer watched and waited, and the midnight chase was far from over. Chapter 10. The Truth Beneath the Waves. The sun rose pale and weary over a restless sea as the Élysée pressed on toward Lisbon. The previous night's revelations had unsettled the ship's uneasy calm, and whispers swirled among the passengers like drifting sea foam. Behind every polite smile lurked suspicion, and every glance was weighted with unspoken fears. Poirot and I gathered in his cabin early, poring over the notes, confessions, and observations accumulated so far. Lefebvre's reluctant admissions had lifted some veils, but left many shadows unilluminated. "The stolen diamond remains unaccounted for," Poirot said, fingers tapping rhythmically on the polished desk. "And the killer's hand is still at work, striking with subtlety and precision." We decided to review the suspects more closely. Lady Agatha remained an enigma, a woman of wealth and influence, but whose sharp gaze and icy manner concealed deeper currents. Miss Hart, the bearer of the heirloom diamond, appeared more vulnerable by the day, yet her secrets were many. The Vales, siblings whose quiet exterior masked tensions I had yet to fully grasp. And Lefebvre, the investigator whose presence complicated matters beyond expectation. During the midday promenade, Poirot intercepted Miss Hart near the stern. Their conversation was low and intense. "She fears the diamond's fate," Poirot later confided to me. "Not merely for its value, but for what it represents." That afternoon, a discovery rocked the ship. In the lower cargo hold, hidden beneath crates of provisions, the ship's crew uncovered a small, intricately carved wooden box. Its contents were unmistakable. The missing diamond nestled in velvet. The revelations sent ripples through the passengers. Who had concealed it, and why? Poirot assembled the key figures in the grand salon. His voice was calm, but carried undeniable authority. "The diamond's concealment within the ship suggests a betrayal from within, not an external thief, but someone among us." Gasps and murmurs followed. "Consider," Poirot continued, "the motive of debt, greed, or desperation. The parcel sent to Miss Hart, the threatening notes, the deaths, all part of a carefully woven web." He turned to Miss Unease Vale. "Madame, your family's involvement cannot be overlooked. Miss Vale's composure cracked briefly. We sought only to protect our interests. Poirot's gaze shifted to Mr. Julian Vale. And you, monsieur, have secrets yet to confess. A tense silence fell. Later, Poirot and I descended to the deck, where the sea stretched dark and infinite beneath a gathering twilight. The truth, Hastings, Poirot mused, often lies beneath the surface, hidden by waves of deception. I felt the weight of his words as the ship's horn echoed faintly across the water, signaling our approach to Lisbon. The final act was near, and with it, the unveiling of a treachery as deep and fathomless as the sea itself. Chapter 11. The Salon Confrontation. The Élysée had slowed to a stately glide as the lights of Lisbon shimmered like distant stars on the horizon. Within the ship's grand salon, the passengers assembled once more, summoned by Poirot for what promised to be a momentous gathering. The air was thick with anticipation, and the undercurrent of suspicion, every eye wary, every gesture measured. Poirot stood at the head of the room, his posture erect, his gaze sweeping the crowd with the precision of a master conductor preparing to reveal a symphony's climax. The tension was palpable. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, voice steady and commanding, "we have traveled a path marked by deceit, danger, and death. Tonight, the truth shall be laid bare." He paused, allowing his words to settle. "2 lives have been lost aboard this vessel, and justice demands answers. Each of you has played a role, knowingly or unknowingly, in the unfolding drama." His eyes fixed on Lady Agatha. "Madam, your vigilance and secrets have guided our understanding." Lady Agatha inclined her head, composed yet alert. Poirot turned to Miss Hart. "Mademoiselle, the diamond you carry is more than a jewel. It is the key to the mystery." Miss Hart's gaze flickered, but she remained silent. To Mr. Lefebvre, Poirot continued, "Your role as investigator has been complicated by personal motives and shadows from the past." Lefebvre's jaw tightened. "Mr. Mallory," Poirot's voice softened, "though you are no longer with us, your intentions were not what they seemed. Your death was a sacrifice in this grim tale." A hush fell. "And to the Vales," Poirot said, addressing the siblings, "your family history intertwines with the threads of this mystery more deeply than you might admit." The siblings exchanged glances, their composure wavering. Poirot stepped forward, eyes blazing. The diamond was hidden to protect a secret, a debt of honor and betrayal. The murderer sought to retrieve it, silencing those who stood in the way. He paced slowly. "But the true culprit is one who wears the mask of innocence most convincingly." Gasps rippled. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot declared, "I reveal to you that the mastermind behind these crimes is none other than Miss Inez." Vale's shock erupted. Miss Vale's face drained of color. Poirot continued, "You sought to recover the diamond, to settle your family's debts, manipulating events to divert suspicion. The parcel, the notes, the attempts on lives, your design." Miss Vale's eyes flashed with desperation. "You have no proof." "Proof?" Poirot smiled thinly. "The diamond was found hidden in your belongings, and your fingerprints marked the threatening notes. The steward's confession placed Lefebvre as your accomplice, coerced into silence." She stood abruptly. "You will regret this." Before she could act, the captain and crew intervened, restraining her. The room fell into a stunned silence. Poirot addressed the passengers once more. "Justice will be served, and this voyage's shadows lifted. Yes, let us remember, the sea holds many secrets, and not all are so easily uncovered." As Miss Vale was led away, I turned to Poirot. "How did you unravel it so swiftly?" He smiled, fingers steepled. "The little grey cells, Hastings, the little grey cells." Outside, the night embraced the Élysée. stars twinkling like silent witnesses to the drama's end. Chapter 12. The Final Twist. The Elysee lay anchored off the Lisbon harbour, the soft lapping of waves against her hull a gentle counterpoint to the storm that had finally broken within her walls. The passengers gathered in subdued groups, the weight of recent revelations settling like a dense fog. Yet, beneath the surface calm, Poirot's sharp mind remained alert, sensing a truth still concealed. As the dawn light filtered through the grand salon's stained-glass windows, Poirot summoned me to his side. "Hastings, the case appears closed, yet something gnaws at my conscience. The puzzle is not complete." We reviewed the evidence once more. The damning proofs against Miss Inez Vale, the hidden diamond, the motives laid bare. Yet Poirot's brow furrowed. There is a final piece, a shadow cast by light. Later, as the passengers prepared to disembark, Poirot requested a private audience with Lady Agatha. Their whispered conversation was brief but intense. Moments after, Poirot gathered the key players in the ship's library, a room lined with leather-bound volumes and the faint scent of old paper. His voice was calm but resolute. "Mesdames et messieurs, it is time for the truth to be fully revealed." He turned to Miss Hart, who sat nervously at the edge of her chair. "Mademoiselle, you have been an unwitting participant in this drama, yet your role is pivotal." She looked up, eyes wide. "The diamond you carried," Poirot continued, "was a decoy. The true gem was hidden elsewhere." A collective gasp rose. Poirot explained how the stolen jewel had been expertly swapped before embarkation, a fact known only to a select few. The parcel, the threatening notes, the murders, they were part of an elaborate ruse to protect the real diamond's secret location. The mastermind behind the deception was not Miss Vale alone, but a figure hiding in plain sight. Captain Duval himself. "Captain," Poirot said softly, "you orchestrated the entire affair, manipulating all parties to recover the jewel without scandal. The deaths, the diversions, the chaos, all means to your calculated end." The captain's face betrayed no emotion. "You have unraveled much, Monsieur Poirot." "Yes, I acted to protect the legacy of my family, to recover what was stolen long ago." "But at what cost?" Poirot asked. "The sea demands sacrifices," the captain replied quietly. As the police prepared to take the captain into custody, Poirot turned to the passengers. "This voyage has shown us the depths to which men will sink for greed and honor alike." Later, as the Elysee prepared to dock, I reflected on the events. Murders, secrets, and lies entwined like seaweed beneath the waves. Poirot stood beside me, gazing out at the approaching shore. "Justice has been served, Hastings, but human nature remains an eternal mystery. Sometimes calm on the surface, but beneath ever turbulent." The ship's horn sounded a melancholy farewell as we disembarked, the Mediterranean sun casting long shadows over a tale of betrayal, courage, and the indomitable spirit of detection. Chapter 13. Reflections at Sea. The bustling quay of Lisbon welcomed the Elysee with a chorus of creaking ropes, shouting sailors, and the clatter of wooden crates. Passengers disembarked, their faces a mix of relief, exhaustion, and quiet contemplation. The horrors and secrets of the voyage were behind them. Or so it seemed. Poirot and I lingered on the deck, watching the city's vibrant life unfurl against the backdrop of azure skies and sun-dappled streets. The salty breeze carried with it a faint hint of jasmine and distant laughter. "Mon ami," Poirot began, adjusting his bowler hat against the breeze, "this case has reminded me that beneath the veneer of civility lie passions as turbulent as the sea itself." I nodded. A voyage meant for leisure became a stage for greed, betrayal, and even murder. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Yet it is in such darkness that the light of justice shines brightest. We walked toward the gangway, passing the crew unloading cargo and passengers gathering their belongings. Miss Evelyn Hart was there, her expression softer now, freed from the weight of fear and suspicion. Lady Agatha and the Reverend conversed quietly nearby, their shared ordeal having forged an unexpected bond. As we prepared to step ashore, Poirot turned and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Hastings, remember this. The heart of man is a labyrinth. Sometimes the path to truth is obscured by shadows, and only patience, observation, and a keen mind can unravel the tangled threads." I smiled. "You make it sound so poetic, mon ami." "Ah, but poetry and detection are sisters," Poirot replied with a smile. "Both seek meaning amid chaos." As the sun climbed higher, we descended the gangplank, leaving behind the Élysée and its secrets. The Mediterranean stretched endlessly ahead, a symbol of mystery, adventure, and the eternal dance between light and shadow. And though the case was closed, the echoes of the voyage would linger in memory, a reminder that beneath every calm surface, a storm may be waiting to break.